it was very important to us that people who are in like a critical capacity, like me, I was reviewing a lot of games, don't have like ties to developers, to keep their coverage as sort of unbiased as possible. Like we're not gonna, like, I'm not gonna review a game if I have like buddies on the development team or something like that.
The minute you start writing about that, the minute happens where you run the risk of violating ethics, because you get so close to the source. Are you biased?
The single biggest thing that games journalists were doing wrong is financially supporting the people they were writing about. There are a couple of stories about sex and all the rest of it, and that concerns individual writers, individual stories where some people may have got too close to some other people and one or two stories were affected.
Would you say that funding a source's creative projects crosses that line?
Absolutely. No doubt in my mind whatsoever. If you're the writer and I'm the inventor, or I'm the creator here in some way, and somehow we have a monetary relationship that is, we hope, going to result in my success, then for you to write about me, that's unethical.
Are there journalistic ethics issues within video games? Based on my research, based on my experience, based on the interviews I've done, there are absolutely issues. We see collusion that is different degrees of obvious in terms of collusion between reviewers and developers and funders. Of course that exists. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Is this the most prominent and important type of journalistic collusion and corruption that exists? I don't think it is, and I'll elaborate on that further. But for those who say that journalistic ethics are an issue, I completely agree with them.
Now, there are a couple of allegations that have been made in regards to Game Journals Pro that is quite specific, and we've seen some of the leaks, and frankly, a lot of them are fairly innocuous. When you have issues of journalistic ethics, and then you have sites that are outright censoring any post regarding this and saying you cannot talk about this subject in general. And when within Game Journo Pros, we did have a couple of people, specifically Ben Kuchera, who criticized Greg Tito for allowing discussion on The Escapist as to this matter, even though Greg Tito had said, look, I do not agree with this stuff, but I feel that it is important to allow that level of discussion. I especially don't like it when we see people like Kyle from Ars Technica saying, maybe we should buy a gift for this developer, and he in fact has admitted that. Yeah, there were a few that seemed to agree with it, and there were also some that suggested an alternative of getting a letter of support together, and then there were a few that said this is way over the line. And I'll give credit to those that said that, incidentally, that seemed to understand it. And I'll also give credit to Kyle Olin for actually accepting that and posting an article where he accepted that was over the line.
And can I just say, is it so bad though? I mean, obviously, is it so bad for somebody to have a place where they feel they can vocalize their idea, the part of them that's just a human being and empathetic? Is it so bad for him to be able to float that and then have other people sort of speak journalistic reason to him? I mean, we can wish that he didn't think that, but I think it's also maybe the process worked there. Maybe what they were doing with Game Journos Pro worked, and maybe this was a sign of the strength of the group in terms of working something out. I don't know.
I think that the problem that I really had with it was that the tone was way too much in I am recruiting people for this. You know, rather than just floating an idea, it was, and there were certain people agreeing like, yeah, we should get together, and they were talking about the letter of support and not even kind of doing it publicly, sort of doing it almost in a clandestine fashion, and that really rubbed me the wrong way. And maybe it's just the kind of candor that results from thinking that your group is private, but I think that people need to be extremely careful when they're touching anything close to that sort of thing.
A lot of people assume that in the Game Journal Pro group that anything unethical that happened easily in the open. It didn't happen like that. It wasn't like that. They may have been a close-knit group. There may have been groupthink, but the way it happened was a lot more subtle. Like, for instance, with Alistair Pensoff being fired, That was something where they came in and said, let's just blacklist this guy. It didn't happen like that. What they did was illegal across multiple states, and they could face serious fines for that. How they did it was very subtle. It wasn't something that you could, like, for instance, if that was unattached to the Alistair Pensoff story, the Destructoid corruption, if those emails were just posted singularly, just by themselves in a post, no one would think anything of it. You wouldn't say it was blacklisted. You wouldn't say that they broke the law. You wouldn't say there's anything wrong with it. But when you put it in context to what they were doing and what happened in real life, what happened to Pensoff, you understand that what they did carried a lot of weight with it. And they didn't see it as colluding, but that's exactly what it, literally by the definition of the law, that's exactly what it was.
What I'd like to see is that gamers continue to do what they've done so far, which is mount a strong, spirited, methodical, ruthless, consistent, and determined rejection of these people. And it's been marvelous to watch. It has been, in my experience, unprecedented.
I'd agree with that absolutely. I mean, I think they're going to be a lot more cautious about running stories like the ones they did about Brad Wardell, because they know now there are thousands of people who will be looking out for that.
Stardot will never happen again, and that is another massive win for Gamergate.
Your obligation is to write, we hope, truth that is newsworthy. And so if at any point you start messing with either of those criteria, that's either it's not truthful or you try to make something newsworthy that's not newsworthy, you run into problems.
Much of the vitriol appears on Twitter hashtag Gamergate. Originally created by gamers concerned with fair gaming reviews, it has grown into a loose movement associated with the worst of online harassment of women.
This is the thing a lot of people need to understand. The mainstream media is trying to cover their own hide. They're trying to push their own agenda. They don't want to tell the truth. They have an opportunity to. They very well can. I've been trying to get in contact with Andrew Yates from the CBC because I wanted a quote from him. I wanted to ask why exactly is it that the CBC can run a one-sided story about Gamergate? Not just one-sided story, but multiple stories. The media doesn't really want to, for those who are pushing their narrative and their agendas about sexual harassment in the gaming industry, they don't want the truth, which is a very sad reality that people kind of have to come to terms with.
Gamergate is a consumer revolt against unethical journalism. You haven't asked a journalist. You've asked someone who's implicated in the corruption, and they've said, it's actually terrible. I think that I'm being, she may well have been personally attacked, but it's nothing to do with Gamergate. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, is the issue not surely that here's like I say, a young woman who felt that this online abuse was causing her to feel this way?
And I think she should contact the FBI. I think that anyone in Gamergate strongly denounces that sort of thing, and it's ridiculous that we have to make that a clear position. But please, contact the authorities. I would like this person found because I do not want to talk about Zoe Quinn. I want to talk about corruption in journalism.
Online journalism is trying to move towards transmedia commerce journalism, and in this regards they call it commerce journalism because basically paying to provide the public with news that looks like news, which is really just sponsored posts. And this is where Gawker, that's where their big advertising money comes from. exactly what you mentioned. This is transmedia content, commerce, journalism. You break it down into native advertising as well.
Even if you've not heard the term native advertising before, you have probably been subjected to it by now. It's when a piece of ostensibly normal content is stamped with tiny disclaimers like this, and then contains messages that are often clear endorsements. A recent study showed that less than half of visitors to a news site could distinguish native advertising from actual news.
So they're pretty smart about how they try to hide their native advertisers. But if you look through, if you find a sponsored post, according to the FTC guidelines, they're supposed to make that known. They don't have to make it known in a specific way. They just have to make it known that it's a sponsored post. You really have to be vigilant in how you look at Gawker's content. It'll just look like a news post. You won't know that it's attached to their native advertising program at all until you click through.
If you're harboring any hopes of bringing down Gawker, then snap out of it and get with the real world. It's not going to happen. You have given them a seriously bloody nose, and you need to understand that those two posts they published, one about Gawker's policy on harassment and one on how Gamergate had affected Gawker, were an extremely humiliating thing for Gawker to have to do. But if you think that you're going to take down the Gawker network, get a grip. There's a comment here, and then I'll hand it back over to you. But there's a comment here in the chat from Critical Kaiju, which I think is sort of the point that I'm making, which is Gamergate is beyond a movement. It's a subculture now. We're not going anywhere. What that means, and it's right, is that the objective has shifted. It is no longer to take out Gawker. Ain't going to happen. It's to have alternative sources of news and win individual arguments. Win the arguments. When Gawker says something, show why they're wrong, prove why they're wrong, embarrass them when they get their facts wrong. Take them on an article by article, an issue by issue, a writer by writer basis, and machine gun them down every time they step out of line. And do the same thing with all the games websites you don't like. Stop saying we're going to take out Kotaku.
Oh, whoa, it's all right, Chloe, they're journalists.
When somebody in the media industry hears that, they'll just laugh at it because it's ridiculous. Instead, be polite, firm, insistent, factual, and relentless about making sure they hold themselves to the highest standards of quality and they get their facts right. If they publish an opinion you don't like, that's not corruption. That's not what corruption means. You are at liberty to complain about it, or to express your disagreement. But what you need to look out for is wrongdoing, failures of accuracy and journalistic process and ethics. And if you can nail them on stuff like that, they have no option but to fix articles when they're wrong, no option but to respond to you. And if you keep doing that, eventually they will raise their standards. That's how to win this, because precisely as the commenter suggested, this is now a subculture. There's now a large, engaged body of people who are alive to many of the same issues and concerns, and who are acting as consumer watchdogs, effectively, on powerful publishers. And I think that's the reason Gamergate's already won.